Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the program. It's Wednesday, January 20th. Coming to you live from our studio in Seoul, I'm Kim Mo-kyun. Before we get started, these are the stories we're following at the top of the hour. South Korea reported 404 new COVID-19 cases Wednesday, a year after the nation confirmed its first infection by the virus. And Prime Minister Chung Se-kyun called for continued efforts to combat the virus. On the eve of the U.S. presidential inauguration, President-elect Joe Biden and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris visited the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. to honor victims of COVID-19. And President-elect Biden's cabinet nominees laid out their policy plans for Korea, with Secretary of State nominee Antony Blinken expressing willingness to restart dialogue with Pyongyang. Defense Secretary nominee Lloyd Austin, meanwhile, spoke of a breakthrough on defense cost sharing with South Korea. We begin with the COVID-19 situation in South Korea. 1 year ago today, South Korea reported its first case of COVID-19. Though a year has passed, the country still grapples with the pandemic, with 404 new cases being reported on Wednesday, a slight uptick from the past couple of days. Now, of the new cases, 373 were locally transmitted and 31 from overseas. More than 73,000 people have been infected with the virus in South Korea so far. Prime Minister Chung Se-kyun said the past year was a year full of challenges and vowed to use all means to contain the virus this year as well. He also stressed the importance of cooperation from the public in order to overcome the virus. Former New Zealand Prime Minister Helen Clark, who's leading a group of experts reviewing the global handling of the pandemic, is calling for reforms to the World Health Organization, saying not enough was done at the start of the outbreak. Clark criticized the World Health Organization for not declaring COVID-19 an international emergency until January 30th, when it was clear there was human-to-human transmission. The experts added the global pandemic alert system is currently not fit for purpose, adding the WHO has been underpowered to do the job. The panel also called for a global reset, adding it would make recommendations in a final report to health ministers from the WHO's 194 member states in May. Germany is extending and tightening its COVID-19 curbs amid raising concerns over the possible spread of a more infectious variant within the country, which was earlier identified. Meanwhile, Britain and Japan are also still grappling with a high number of virus fatalities. Kim Hyo-sun has a wrap-up.
German authorities have decided to extend the country's lockdown until February 14th, aiming to contain the spread of the virus amid news of a new variant found there. German Chancellor Angela Merkel and state premiers agreed Tuesday that the lockdown will be put in place for most shops and schools. Curfews, mandatory face mask wearing on public transportation, and work-from-home schemes will also be included. Experts who are worried about the possible spread of the more infectious variants said such measures are inevitable. Against this backdrop, the German health ministry says it will beef up monitoring of the new variants going forward.
As a general rule, at least 5% of all positive tests should be genome sequenced. The analysis of the coronavirus thus becomes an integral part of pandemic surveillance.
While the UK is seeing a gradual downturn, it has recorded an accumulated death toll of 90,000. The country has added over 1,600 new deaths on Tuesday alone. The UK now has the world's fifth highest COVID-19 death toll, trailing the US, Brazil, India, and Mexico. Elsewhere, Japan confirmed 103 new fatalities on Tuesday, the first daily death toll over 100. This has raised the total death toll to over 4,900, while 1,100 patients have severe or critical conditions. Experts have warned the rising number of new cases, and especially those with unidentified sources of infection in Tokyo, may be indicating that the capital is undergoing a possible explosive spread. Last week, a state of emergency was expanded to include 7 more prefectures in a bid to contain the country's third wave. Kim Hyo-sun, Arirang News.
Russia says its second COVID-19 vaccine is 100% effective based on the results of clinical trials. This is according to the country's leading news agency, TASS, on Tuesday. EpiVac Corona, the vaccine manufactured by Siberia's Vector Institute, has undergone mass trials. It's due to be mass-produced from February. Russia's first vaccine, Sputnik V, is known to be 92% effective. The COVID-19 pandemic has sparked an unprecedented decline in car production in Europe. According to a European Automobile Association on Tuesday, new car registrations across the EU fell by nearly 24% last year. That's the biggest year-on-year decline since the organization began collecting data in 1990. 2 periods of full-scale lockdown and other restrictions throughout the year were pointed out as the cause of the plunge. Spain suffered the worst slump among Europe, with new car sales falling by a third, followed by Italy and France. On the eve of the U.S. presidential inauguration, President-elect Joe Biden attended a memorial service in Washington, D.C. to honor the lives lost to the COVID-19 pandemic. And with only hours remaining, the transition of power is set to begin, unlike any other inauguration in U.S. history, due to the pandemic and unprecedented levels of security. Our Choi Min-jung reports.
On the eve of the U.S. presidential inauguration, President-elect Joe Biden and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris arrived at the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. to honor the victims of COVID-19. The memorial's reflecting pool was lit up with 400 illuminating lights to commemorate the 400,000 lives lost to the pandemic. Biden delivered remarks from in front of the pool to pay tribute and share his grief.
To heal, we must remember. It's hard sometimes to remember, but that's how we heal. It's important to do that as a nation. That's why we're here today. Between sundown and dusk, let us shine the lights in the darkness along the sacred pool of reflection and remember all whom we lost.
Biden and Harris are less than 24 hours away from being sworn in as the 46th President and Vice President of the United States. While staying true to some well-established traditions, the transition of power will also see major changes from previous inaugurations due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The National Mall will be closed to the public, and the traditional parade, which normally takes place on the streets of Washington, will be replaced with a virtual one called the Parade Across America. The new leaders will also feature in a live 90-minute program hosted by the actor Tom Hanks, which will include performances by top celebrities. Following the recent attack on the Capitol building, 25,000 National Guard troops have been placed in central Washington to prepare against any possible security threats on the big day. Also, experts say the handover of the nuclear football, a briefcase that allows the president to authorize nuclear attacks, will be different this year, as Trump does not plan on attending Wednesday's ceremony. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
On the eve of his White House departure, President Trump released a farewell message touting some of his office's greatest accomplishments. He also wished for the next administration's success in keeping America safe and prosperous, all while avoiding saying Joe Biden's name. Choi Jung-yoon has more.
Less than 24 hours before the end of his term in the Oval Office, Donald Trump made his last address as president to the American people in a pre-recorded 20-minute video. Trump touted the success of his administration, saying that it achieved the mission of making America great again.
As I conclude my term as the 45th President of the United States, I stand before you truly proud of what we have achieved together. We did what we came here to do, and so much more.
He also offered his best wishes to the new administration, but didn't mention President-elect Joe Biden's name throughout his speech.
This week, we inaugurate a new administration and pray for its success in keeping America safe and prosperous. We extend our best wishes, and we also want them to have luck, a very important word.
For months, Trump had refused to concede that he lost the 2020 election to Biden, choosing instead to fan the flames of conspiracy theories claiming that he in fact won. This encouraged his supporters to storm the Capitol, which he condemned as political violence.
Political violence is an attack on everything we cherish as Americans. It can never be tolerated. Now more than ever, we must unify around our shared values and rise above the partisan rancor and forge our common destiny.
As the only twice impeached president in U.S. history, Trump's political future, however, may be at risk. If the Senate votes to convict Trump, the chamber can permanently bar him from holding public office again. Republican leaders, including Vice President Mike Pence, are skipping President Trump's send-off from Washington, instead opting to focus on the inauguration of President-elect Joe Biden, which Trump plans to skip. Choi Jung-yoon, Arirang News.
President-elect Joe Biden's nominee for Secretary of State says the U.S. plans a full review of the country's approach to North Korea. During a Senate confirmation hearing on Tuesday, Antony Blinken said that the incoming administration will look into ways to bring Pyongyang back to the negotiating table. On the North's denuclearization, Blinken added that Washington will keep a close eye not only on the security but also humanitarian issues to avoid unnecessary suffering. Meanwhile, on the same day, Defense Secretary nominee Lloyd Austin also said that if he heads the department, he will seek the early conclusion of cost-sharing negotiations with South Korea. Defense cost-sharing talks between Seoul and Washington have been held since late 2019, but significant progress has not been made. U.S. Treasury nominee Janet Yellen says America does not seek to weaken the greenback to gain a competitive advantage. At a Senate confirmation hearing Tuesday, Yellen said that if confirmed as Treasury Secretary, she will oppose attempts by other countries to pursue such a strategy. It would mean a reversal from the Trump administration's call for a weaker U.S. dollar. Yellen added that the Biden administration will be prepared to fight against China's unfair trade practices. With the inauguration of U.S. President-elect Joe Biden on Wednesday, 4 years of simmering bilateral conflict between the U.S. and Iran could see a shift. The Iranian government has called for the new U.S. administration to focus on gaining Iran's trust by implementing the deal's undertakings fully and immediately. In 2018, President Trump had withdrawn from the international accord and placed punitive sanctions on the Persian Gulf nation. Iran also imposed sanctions on Trump and many members of his administration, including Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin, over their alleged role in supporting terrorism. Tehran's move allows the seizure of any assets in Iran of sanctioned individuals. But with no such assets reported, the move is symbolic and unlikely to have any financial impact on the outgoing U.S. president or officials. Now, what would America's trade policy look like under the incoming Joe Biden administration? He's understood to prefer multilateralism and is also concerned about issues like labor and the environment. For more, our Yoon Jung-min has part 2 of our series this week on Biden's inauguration.
Under Joe Biden's leadership, the U.S. is expected to push for multilateralism, free trade, and conforming to international rules when it comes to trade.
Including a trade and economic agenda that produces and protects American workers, our intellectual prosperity, and the environment, to ensuring security and prosperity in the Indo-Pacific region. To championing human rights, we're stronger and more effective when we're flanked by nations.
Biden favors working together with allies and trade partners, so one area for cooperation between Seoul and Washington could be both of them joining the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, known as CPTPP.
The U.S. government will turn their eyes back to the Obama administration's Pivot to Asia strategy, of which TPP was a very important component. And furthermore, TPP is a form of multilateralism that Biden, as a president-elect, has shown keen interest in.
His trade policy also emphasizes labor, human rights, and environmental issues while reinforcing America's global value chain. Because of these issues in particular, many experts think Biden will continue a hardline approach to China on the trade front. That'll likely be the line taken by Biden's pick for U.S. Trade Representative Catherine Tai.
State-owned enterprises and industrial subsidies, cyber theft, or the technology transfer and intellectual property issues. So these are all issues that the U.S. plans to deal with a multilateral manner under the Biden administration.
The expert added that traditional U.S. allies and economic partners might be asked by the U.S. to join its initiative against China, which could force South Korea to walk a narrow path between Washington and Beijing. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
Good morning. We've already arrived at the last winter season term, 대한, meaning a major cold. So it was a biting start to the day, but the highs will rise fast to the milder side, leading to wide gaps of more than 10 degrees Celsius in many parts of the country. But dry alerts are in place across the east, while Busan and Daegu are under dry weather advisories as well. So be extra careful with fire. There have been reports of wildfires along the East Coast lately. So this afternoon, highs in most parts will be 2 to 8 degrees higher, possibly feeling more like early March. And the air quality will also be normal to good across the country, along with mostly sunny skies. So it should be a good day for an afternoon stroll. And we'll witness a warmer trend for the time being, but a wintry mix is in the forecast across the country through the weekend. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the weather conditions around the world.
And that's a wrap for us at the hour on Arirang News. We'll be back with more of the day's headlines at noon Korea time, so stay tuned. Thank you for watching and goodbye.